Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. At this time, I will call into open session this meeting of the Arlington ISD Board of Trustees, April 19th at 7:07 p.m. Thank you, everyone, for being here this evening. We will start, as is custom, with our opening ceremony. Please join Mr. Chad Branham in leading us with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And now, if you would all please silence all cell phones and electronic devices to avoid disruptions to those around you. And if you would also join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. Okay. So the first item on our agenda this evening is appointments. We have, let's see, on item A, the appointment of the principal for Workman Junior High, Dr. Cavazos.
Thank you, President Rice. I'd like to recommend the board appoint the individual discussed in closed session for principal of Workman Junior High.
Move for approval.
Second.
Have a motion by Mr. Hogg, a second by Mrs. Walton to approve. Any discussion? Seeing none, when it's ready, please vote. There we go. Motion carries unanimous. Mr. Hibbs is not able to be with us this night. Dr. Cavazos.
Thank you, President Rice, and it's my pleasure to introduce the new principal for Workman Junior High, Ms. Jacqueline McClendon. So Jacqueline attended the University of Texas at Arlington, receiving her Bachelor of Arts in History and Education, Texas A&M University Commerce for her Master of Science in Counseling. Most recently, the interim principal at Workman Junior High, has been an associate principal at Sam Houston High School, principal at Foster Elementary, has been an assistant principal at Shackelford, at Carter, at Pope, has been a counselor and a first grade teacher. Jackie, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you, Board President Reich, members of the board, and Dr. Cavazos for your vote of confidence. I also would like to thank Ms. Brown. Ms. Brown, thank you for seeing something in me that would match with the needs of Workman. It was a unique responsibility or unique opportunity to be the interim there. So thank you, and thank you for your continued support as I move into the principalship. I'd like to also thank Mr. Benavides over at Sam Houston. Mr. B, I love you with my whole heart. I really... It's true, it's true. I have had the unique opportunity to work alongside you, learning and growing and stretching and learning about high school and working and walking towards the goals that you have for all of the students there at SAM. And I thank you. You look up passion in the dictionary, you'll see Mr. B's face there. And also the administrative team. Team, I'll miss you collectively and individually. Thank you for sharing your stories with me and for listening to mine as we strategize for the teachers and the students there at Sam Houston. To my new Workman team, thank you so much for your knowledge and for sharing your teachers and students with me. I'm looking very much forward to continuing to grow. We will not fail. I did bring with me my family, well, actually my daughter, Jordan, and Jordan standing for all four of the girls as we accept this responsibility. And again, we humbly thank you.
Next, I'd like to make some introductions of some individuals who are already working, and so this is an opportunity to introduce them. So it's my pleasure to introduce our new Director of Athletics, Mr. Eric White. Eric attended Baylor University to receive his Bachelor of Science in Health Sciences. Most recently has been the Assistant Athletic Director in Mansfield ISD, has been an athletic trainer in Mansfield ISD, athletic trainer in Joshua, in Fort Worth, and has been a clinical athletic trainer in Hillcrest, in Waco. Eric, congratulations and welcome.
Thank you. President Reich, Board, Dr. Cavazos, thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm very excited to be here. I've worked in a neighboring district right beside you. I've competed against and worked along with this Grace, and I'm so excited for the opportunity to be here and serve the kids, the coaches, the teachers, the administrators. It's just an outstanding opportunity. I would also like to thank Mr. Hill in this process of getting here and getting started. The vision of this district is outstanding. I've been here a couple of weeks, and the people I've got to meet and talk to, from coaches to administrators and teachers, are just, it's a very exciting time for me. It's great people. The reputation of Arlington, it's exactly what I thought I was getting into. I'm looking forward to joining the team, working, and serving the kids of the district. I would also like to thank, there's some people here from the athletic department, Bruce and Kim and Judy and Melody, for welcoming me and showing me the ropes and helping me figure things out. It's fast-paced right now, but it's lots of fun. And once again, thank you, and I'm really excited about the future here and what we're going to do in the athletic department. Thank you. Before I forget, I have some people here that are also with me tonight.
Good save.
I was going to be in lots of trouble.
Yes, you were.
I have Lori Forehand that's here with me tonight, and then my daughters Morgan and Riley. So.
All right.
Next, I'd like to introduce our new Director of Food and Nutrition Services, Mr. David Lewis. David attended the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center for his Bachelor of Science in Clinical Dietetics. Most recently has been an Assistant Director of Food and Nutrition Services in Arlington ISD. Has also been a Director of Nutrition Services with Aramark in Dallas. Has been a consultant with Medics in Richardson. Has been an instructor with the Arts Institute of Dallas School of Culinary Arts. A clinical dietitian with Parkland Health and Hospital Systems in Dallas. And an owner of CartSmart here in Arlington. David, congratulations and welcome.
Thank you. President Reich, members of the board, Dr. Cavazos, thank you very much for this honor and for the privilege to serve our community through this work. I didn't get here by myself. I've had great mentors, including Ms. Jackie Anderson, our previous director. I've had the support of Ms. Powell, and whose support, confidence, trust, thank you. It's appreciated more than I can express. And I also have a food service team that is the absolute best in the nation. Their heart, their passion, their talent is second to none. They are truly unmatched in that, and I'm truly blessed to be able to serve alongside them each day. I'd like to recognize my wife. We've been together for 28 years, and so I've been able to go through life with her. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Welcome to an amazing place, an amazing district, and those that have been here, you know what it's like. We're so pleased to have you in your new leadership positions. As is customary, we ask that you follow Mr. Kale out front for a brief reception so that we all have a chance to share greetings and welcomes with you. And if the audience would indulge the board and let us go first so that we can come back in and get back to business. Thank you. We'll return in approximately 10 minutes, 7:25, 7:30, somewhere in there. Thank you. Okay, I'm now calling back into order this open meeting of the Board of Trustees. And we will continue on with our agenda. Next item is a public hearing. We do not have a public hearing. Open forum for agenda items. We do not have any cards, so we will continue on. So next, we have our discussion action item, TASB Board Policy Update. Dr. Cavazos.
Thank you, President Rice, and this is a brief actual update that mostly legal, and the Governance Committee has met and reviewed this, so Mr. Hogg, you.
I think you got it now, Dr. Reich. This is TASB Policy Update 110. As y'all know, Governance Committee, myself, Ms. Walton, and Mr. Chapa reviewed this. Sometimes our policy updates require lots of work, and sometimes they're all legal, such as this one. So we really don't have a lot of choices or changes in what we're changing on this, as it's all coming directed to us from Austin from legal policy updates. So at this time, I move to approve TASB Policy Update 110.
A second.
All right, we have a motion by Mr. Hogg and a second by Mrs. Walton to approve the TASB 110 policy update. Any discussion? All right, seeing none, please vote. All trustees present vote in the affirmative. Thank you, Governance Committee, for going through yet another policy update. I'm sure there will be another one coming soon. All right, moving on. Next is items to be withdrawn from the consent agenda. Are there any items trustees wish to withdraw? To consider separately? No, it was adjusted.
Okay.
Okay. Ms. Powell?
President Reich, board members, Dr. Cavazos, good evening. There are 4 bids on the consent agenda this evening, and in all 4 cases, the administration is recommending the lowest bids and the bids that represent the best value to the district.
Thank you very much. Do I have a motion to accept the consent agenda? Ms. Walton?
I move we accept the consent agenda, and I just would like to add the comment that I'm very glad to see us using local vendors on many of the orchestra instruments and band instruments that we are approving bids for tonight.
Excellent. So we have a motion by Mrs. Walton. Ms. Mays, I see your mic is lit for
Second.
a second. Okay. So a motion by Mrs. Walton, a second by Mrs. Mays. Any further discussion? And please vote. There we go. Consent passes. Thank you. Moving on, our next item is a discussion item for the Holdsworth Center update. Dr. Cavazos.
Thank you, President Rice. And this evening, we'd like to present an update on our Holdsworth Leadership Development Program that we're a part of, and we'll reorient everyone in terms of what Holdsworth means and what we're doing with our partnership. I think it's important to note that this is a leadership development journey that supports our strategic plan, and it actually works as an accelerant to our strategic plan in the leadership area. And so tonight, Dr. Wirtz will provide an update, as well as Tracy will provide an update on Holdsworth and where we are in our district in relation to the next level of that after an orientation on that. So Dr. Wirtz.
Good evening, Dr. Reich, members of the board, Dr. Cavazos. My pleasure to be here this evening to give you an update on our work with the Holdsworth Center. This has really been a journey this year. We have learned a tremendous amount in this process, and I believe it's really benefiting our work in the system. And so tonight I'm here to share with you an update. And then once I'm finished giving you an overall update around the leadership definition work that we've been engaged in, Tracy Brown, the lead area superintendent, will be here to share with you about our rollout that actually happened today around the campus leadership program. So our objectives basically today or this evening are to give you an update about our partnership, to talk about how we have rolled out and our work around the leadership definition, the embedding of the cultural tenets into that definition, and then of course, as I mentioned earlier, the campus leadership program. So when we approached the work around Holdsworth and the work in the Holdsworth Center, we really considered when we were applying and deciding to be part of it about the strategic plan. What are the actual objectives of the strategic plan, and how could our engagement with the Holdsworth Center actually serve as an accelerant to the strategies that are in that plan? And one of the strategies specifically outlined in the strategic plan is 4.4, which is around enhancing core leadership competencies of administrators and managers. The work with Holdsworth is directly centered around that. It's all about the development of competencies for administrators, for leaders at all levels of the organization, whether you're a classroom teacher, leader, all the way up to executive leadership. And how do you create pathways and define very specifically what are the behaviors and dispositions that you're looking for in a person that you want to call leader here in Arlington ISD. When you think about educational leadership in general, you might ask yourself, well, why spend your time there specifically? Research shows that after the teacher, outside of the teacher, the second greatest impact on student outcomes is actually a campus principal. Effective district leadership also influences student achievement, and in order for us to have successful schools, we have to create systems at the district level to allow that to actually, that development to occur at the campus level. Also, if you really want to influence the trajectory of student learning in a building, one of the main drivers is the leadership that is at the school. The leaders are responsible for setting the vision. They're responsible for creating the systems and the supports needed for the teachers to do their very best work. And so a focus around leadership strives to provide them with the tools to do those things. And then finally, widely distributed leadership is more effective than leadership from the top. Having solid leadership at the district level is important, but we know that you have to have solid leadership at all levels of the organization, from the classroom all the way to the superintendency, in order for there to be effective classroom instruction. If you were to look at districts across Texas, you can be affirmed very quickly in terms of how important leadership actually is. In Texas, Texas needs approximately 10,000 principals and superintendents. In fact, principals leading Texas public schools, right now there are about 8,600 of them. There are over 1,200 superintendents, and then there's countless numbers of central office leaders in those systems helping those schools be successful with students. In order for us to continue to reach our goals, we have to build a pool of people who are capable of continually basically serving as on the bench and ready to assume those roles as movement happens throughout the system. And so our work with Holdsworth has been directly influencing our ability to create those pathways and articulate them so people know how to grow and specifically in what areas. In order to meet the needs, Holdsworth is actually working with school districts across the state. There are 7 of them, and we happen to be one of them. The demographics of the school districts that are working with Holdsworth, they vary from small districts. We happen to be the largest of the 7 that are working with Holdsworth right now in their initial cohort, but they're all across the state. Some of them include Grand Prairie ISD, Klein ISD, PSJ. There are several districts throughout the state. The one thing that's unique about Holdsworth and their partnership with districts is their intention is not to supplant leadership at a school district. So they do not insert themselves into a district and then push a specific agenda. They really are more about creating a partnership and working side by side with the minds that are in the leadership roles of the district to develop the systems that will be sustainable over time. So instead of coming in and being a quick fix, they take the perspective of a long-term rollout or a long-term design of a system, and this takes time, and that's the reason why the partnership is at a minimum of 5 years. They also don't believe in this concept that leadership is a superhero, like you can come in and fix everything as a leader by yourself, that it actually requires systems and teams of people to make effective change. And so all the learning and all the processes that they foster to help you develop at the system is all focused around the development of teams, which is why we function with Holdsworth as an actual unit, as a team. They also are primarily focused on building our capacity, and they don't peddle what they call prescriptions, quick wins or quick fixes around very complex problems. They are more focused on diving deep with you and helping you to get down to root cause in figuring out what's the breakdown in the system and how can you actually shore things up and find long-term solutions that will actually build a program over time. Their approach actually is around 3 different areas. They have the district leadership program. That consists of a core group of what we call a steering committee here in Arlington, which consists of 6 people of executive leadership and senior staff. Those of us that are on this committee, we engage with Holdsworth specifically for 2 years of learning, and we work alongside the superintendent. And the purpose of this is, as a team, to start to refine what our vision for excellence is, to really identify what change we want or believe needs to occur in the system, and how do you design systems to help foster that or make that happen. And also, it helps us to think about where are the strengths within the team and how do you facilitate the change process within a system the size of Arlington. They also have this very action-based approach to learning. So rather than just going to a Holdsworth session, so to speak, and learning from really some of the best minds in education around the world, they teach you concepts and then they spend their time with you in your system actually applying those in your work. So when we say a true partnership, what you'll find is that Holdsworth embed staff in our team to work with us on a weekly basis, actually, to take the concepts that we're learning and help to actualize them in the system themselves, rather than just kind of leaving districts of their own volition to kind of figure it out. The other program that we're going to talk about tonight is the Campus Leader Program, which is another 2-year program. And this will impact approximately 60% of our campus leadership teams over the course of a 2-year period. So over the 5 years, every year, starting next year, there will be another cohort of several schools that will have an opportunity to participate in the Campus Leader Program, which Ms. Brown will actually talk about tonight. And these programs, or these cohorts in this program, are layered on top of each other. So 1 year a group will start, and then the next year another group will start, but each group or cohort will go over a 2-year period, kind of like the District Leader Program. And in essence, though, the purpose of that program is to help campus principals and their leadership teams do the very similar work that we're doing at the district level, but around a problem or practice that's connected to student learning outcomes at the actual campus themselves. And in the middle, over this entire 5-year program, Holdsworth actually provides really intense support to help us to develop a bench of talent, so that people in the system know specifically, if I want to grow and develop myself, how do I do that? What are the pathways for growth and development for me, whether I want to be a teacher, leader, or a coach, or a principal, or go into executive leadership. The goal is to help us figure out ways to grow and develop people in a way that we retain the best talent that we have, and also to customize the learning and capacity of people throughout the system. So for Arlington ISD, Holdsworth really helps to focus or deliver 3 primary things. The first thing is to help develop a critical mass throughout the system where everyone has a shared and common vision about what excellence should look like. So part of our work, as we work with the campus leadership teams and even as a system, is to, 1, define what is leadership and how does it look like, what does it look like behaviorally when it's being done with excellence, and start to share a common vision and definition about what that looks like across the system, so that everyone is actually speaking the same language and looking at it in a calibrated, similar purview. Also, the goal is to enhance our capacity to manage leadership talent and to lead change. Not just to grow and develop them, but also how do you help leaders then leverage their learning to facilitate positive change so it affects student outcomes in a meaningful way. And then finally, a very strategic approach to build what I was saying earlier, a bench of future leaders, and to retain those who are the top talent in our area. Now, you have seen this before. This is the framework that Holdsworth basically articulates all the work that we're doing. And the best way that I can describe that work, the process that we're going through, is you start at the foundation where culture is, and you literally work your way up. And if you remember in the fall when I came to share our first update, one of the things that I mentioned is that we went through a leadership assessment process where we sent out a survey to every person who touches instruction in the district. So teachers, teacher leaders, principals, APs, central office. And the goal was to figure out how well we were doing on each of these things. How defined was our definition around leadership? What did that look like in individual roles? Do people understand that? How well do we articulate our vision and expectation from central office all the way down to the classroom? What kinds of incentives did we provide for people to, one, stay in the system, but also to start to exhibit the specific behaviors that we were looking for? And then how well do we do in identifying, developing, placing, and supporting leaders across our system, all with the goal that this would actually impact the very top part, which is the roof of which symbolizes the actual student achievement. And when we received our results, that we worked on those as a team to figure out, okay, where are our strengths and what are some things that we can actually shore up and how do we prioritize what those things are. And so as we work with Holdsworth, our goal is to eventually work our way all the way through the house is what we call it, and to continually shore those things up annually each year. Our participation with Arlington in the partnership as Arlington ISD was through an application process which was competitive in nature. We had to submit an intent to apply. The application itself was actually quite rigorous. I think we submitted probably 10 pages of narrative, and they did site visits and interviews. Once we were selected, it was completely funded through the philanthropy of Mr. Charles Butt, who is the founder of HEB Stores. I think he invested approximately $120 million for this center. It is a relationship that lasts about 5 years, and our intent was to accelerate the work that you had outlined for us as part of the strategic plan. So the very first part of our work was around district culture, and one of the things we hear said a lot is culture eats strategy for breakfast, meaning you can put all sorts of ideas on the table, all sorts of strategy, but the culture will dictate how successful those things are. And so we had to ask ourselves, culture can take care of itself, or you can be intentional about the culture you design and facilitate and foster in a system. And so we had to ask ourselves, well, what is the culture of Arlington ISD, and what's the foundation for which we want to build it? And what we realized was that among our priorities, one of our highest priorities was around the actual learner's experience. Our number one goal is that 100% of our kids graduate exceptionally prepared. And so we had to ask ourselves, what does that actually mean to graduate exceptionally prepared? And in Arlington, it means that you not only acquire the technical skills or the content knowledge that you need in terms of your coursework, but that you walk away with what we call life-ready skills to actually engage in a productive way in society and in the job market when you leave. And you can see up on the screen, those are 6 different skills, which we call life-ready skills, that we're looking to foster in our students. And we do that by ensuring that they experience those on a daily basis in the classroom. Well, in order for that to happen, we knew that we had to have a strong call to action and then design systems and a culture that was going to intentionally help produce those things. And so we knew that in order to ensure that the learning experience we wanted students to have was going to produce those skills, that we needed to establish a culture that supported leaders in their development and in sustaining systems, and specifically behaviors that guaranteed the kind of learning we wanted students to have in the classroom. And so the first step to that whole process was to establish very concretely cultural tenets. What are the cultural tenets that we want to see in Arlington ISD? And specifically, what do those behaviors look, sound, and feel like? How do we celebrate them when they're occurring? How do we make them aspirational in nature so that people have something to strive for? And then how do we continue to foster and reinforce them over time through systems and alignment to our theory of action? So these are these 6 cultural tenets that are the foundation of our work in leadership development. The first one is promote risk-taking, which is all about being innovative, trying new ideas, trying new pedagogy and practices, and feeling safe enough to actually take a risk and try something new and know that it's okay, that if it doesn't go perfectly the first time, the goal is to try to just keep getting better. We want to make sure we put our students first. So regardless of which part of the organization that you work in, whether you're in the classroom, in central office, in security, transportation, whatever it may be, that when you're making a decision, that you're thinking specifically about the students and what your decision is going to do in terms of impacting their learning in the classroom. We also want all of our employees to own their work. We have passion around the work. We believe that our primary responsibility is to prepare our students, and so we want people to feel responsible for their work and that they have the autonomy to work, to take action around the work that they've been asked to do. We also want to make every interaction count. We have a really diverse district. We have people with different backgrounds, different mindsets and thought, and we think that it's important for us to try to make every interaction count and to embrace those differences. And finally, the very last one is to get better every day. You often hear continuous improvement, which is really a jargony kind of word. And what we wanted to do is label it like, what is it actually? Well, we want you to strive to get better every day. If you're doing really, really great, try to get better a little more. If you have areas you want to grow in, try to get better in those areas. So we really want to create a culture where we know that we're always striving to do something a little bit better. For us, that is the foundation of the entire system. So what you'll find as I go through our work around the leadership definition is as you go through the specific behaviors we're looking for in a leader, they also articulate those behaviors that are outlined in the cultural tenets. They're married. So if I'm a leader and I'm exhibiting the behaviors that are part of the cultural tenets, I've already then intentionally demonstrated many of the things that are part of the leadership definition. So I'm going to take a few minutes now just to kind of go through where we are with the leadership definition, which is the next step after you define the culture. And a clear leadership definition for us is really the foundation of alignment, and it's critical because it not only defines what you're looking for in sitting leaders, so people who are currently within the system, but it also helps us build a system for who we're going to look for when we're trying to find future leaders. So a leadership definition lays the foundation because it's how we not only identify and select them, but it also drives what we choose to develop people in, what kind of goals we set with people. It also drives our professional learning and how we grow new leaders in the system. And then it also provides some clear and consistent standards across the system that we can coach people towards. So if you're on board and in the system, or you're currently a sitting leader, it allows us to then coach you towards something specific, and we begin to all speak very similar language rather than having to be independent of each other or be dependent upon the leader that's currently working with you. It also allows us to be purposeful in making sure that we look at the whole system, and so when we design professional learning, that we link it to the needs that we know that actually exist within the system so we can begin to close gaps. Our design of our leadership definition was actually a two-step process. The first process was an overarching definition that was common to everybody. So if you worked, as I said, in security or transportation or finance or even in academic services, the categories and the indicators that were within those categories for the definition are common for all people. They're the same. The difference is once you identify the specific categories and indicators that belong to everybody, is how do you then make it so it's role specific? So depending upon who I am, I know where my entry point actually is. So we went through two steps. We kind of worked on, we're almost on the second step, finalizing it. We're at that phase right now. So the first one was identify the overarching categories and indicators, and then take those to role specificity, who I am, and what's my entry point in each of those things, depending on what I'm actually doing. This was an iterative process that we really tried to ground in research. And the first thing we asked ourselves, we brought a task force of stakeholders from across the system together, and they've been working with us all year long from all parts of the organization, which actually has been really great to participate in. And the first thing we asked ourselves is, what does the research say that effective leadership looks and sounds like? And what are the specific behaviors that produce results? And so we actually spent time digging into the research and trying to figure out what that was, and then leverage that to kind of build our framework. And so some of the research that we looked at is we looked at some examples of frameworks that were already high quality and in place in education and outside education. So we looked at the YMCA, we looked at EdFuel and KIPS framework. We also looked at the Ontario Leadership Framework, which is part of Ontario in the Toronto area in Canada, which is actually a very well-written framework. And then we also looked at the research at the University of Washington, which have an educational leadership center, which produces a lot of research around the principalship, specifically instructional leadership, and what are the qualities and components of someone who leads. Once we did that, and dug into them, then we started brainstorming as a group, what are potential categories that we would want to have as part of our leadership definition here in Arlington. We read different frameworks. We've read the research. What are our own ideas? And the first reason, one of the important parts of this this process that I think was important in ours is that we wanted to make sure we calibrated the entire group around what quality leadership looked like. When you bring everyone in from across the district and everyone has different ideas around leadership, it can become a very messy process. And so the first thing you have to define for each other is when we say leader, like what are we actually talking about? So once we did that, then we started thinking, okay, so which categories from the research can we draw from our work? So once we did that, we started creating general categories, and this is an example of just the initial draft that we thought about. So some categories that came up were like personal leadership. How do you lead as a person? The relentless pursuit of results was an example. Developing and empowering others, having growth mindset. And then we started thinking, okay, of the categories that are there, what are some indicators that would, or behaviors specifically that you would be looking for that would tell you that that category is actually something that's developed in a person. And so we brainstormed 5 or 6 indicators in each category, and we started refining them. And one of the things that we did is we took that iterative process, that initial stab at it, and then we compared our work back to the research and said, well, which ones did we miss? And which ones do we put in our definition that aren't really supported by research at all? And then we refined it and pulled things out and added things to it. After we went through that process, then we decided, we talked about, well, how can we create a visual that would be meaningful to people, that would represent the definition in a way that you could publish. It's one thing just to put it in a narrative form or on paper in words. We wanted to find some way to articulate it that caught people's attention, that said something to people, and that was clear and easy. And so this is just some pictures of some examples that we started with. And we talked about how some are circular in nature. We talked about how some lead more as a progression. And really, the way we went through the process was just whatever, let the groups kind of think for themselves. What do they think? Now, the process that we went through all year long it was almost like I would call it a volley between the steering committee and the task force committee. So we let the task force really start the seed work and drive some of the work, and then it would almost be kicked to the steering committee, and we would refine things and make some decisions, and then go back to the task force and ask for their feedback, and they would dig a little more. And that whole process has been going on all year long. So what you'll see here is by the 3rd task force meeting, we had landed in a few areas. The first thing we had done is we had a draft form of what we thought the potential categories could be. We also had finished and finalized the 6 cultural tenets, and then we had created a draft visual for what the actual leadership definition could look like. One of the things that we thought about too was that our leadership pipeline and the work and the definition needed to also recognize that there were pivot points as you grow and develop as a leader that needed to be articulated in the actual document itself. So this is an example of a concept that's taught out of Harvard University, specifically about what leadership pivot points happen over an organization, and specifically which pivot points tend to be more challenging for people than others. So leading yourself would be, for example, if your only point of responsibility was yourself and you didn't necessarily have other adults that you were responsible for. Leading others might be a member of the organization who is responsible for not only themselves, but they lead a group of adults, like maybe a grade level department chair, or it could be a coordinator who works with specialists at the district level. Leading leaders would be a person who leads other people who are leading other people. So it could be like an assistant principal who's responsible for working with department chairs, or it could be a director who's responsible for working with coordinators. And then finally, leading the organization are people who are leading other departments or large parts of multiple departments within an organization. So like the superintendent or myself might be a leader of an organization, or it could be a principal that leads is a person who would lead an organization. Well, the research is showing that when you pivot from lead to self to lead to others, that's where people struggle more. And when you go from leading leaders to leading the organization, those are the struggle points. And the reason being is because the things you need to know and be able to do to lead yourself are very different than when you start leading other people. And when you're leading a group of leaders and you go from that to leading an organization, which is less task-oriented and more systems and visioning, those skill sets are different too. And so one of the things we've been working with the task force is to make sure that when those pivot points are occurring, that they're actually reflected in the document, and that people who are aspiring to lead others, if they're leading themselves right now, or people who are aspiring to lead parts of the organization, but they're currently leading leaders, what are the skills that they need to work on, and how can we intentionally grow and develop them so that when they make those changes, they're actually successful in their roles. So this is an example of what we've been working on. We actually did some of this work actually today with our task force. This is pretty much where we're at today. So what you'll see on the left-hand side is an example of our leadership definition. This is the visual that we've landed on. And what I wanted to give you is an example of how that's translating specifically into some level of specificity in a document. So if you look on the left-hand side, you'll see that I've highlighted strategic thinker and decision maker under the category of passion for the work. So passion for the work is one of the categories, commitment to personal growth is one of the categories, and then the last one is dedication to the team. And under each of those three categories are indicators. The example I'm going to share with you tonight is specifically around strategic thinker and decision maker. So what we've done with the team is, if you'll look over to the right-hand side now, we've taken that specific indicator, strategic thinker and decision maker, under passion for the work, and we've given a description of it, what that actually means, and then we've provided very specific descriptors for what that looks like when you lead yourself, what it looks like when you lead others, what it looks like when you lead leaders, and what it looks like when you lead an organization. And what you'll notice is we have a document that looks like this if you are in a campus role, and then there's another document if you are in a district role. So what you'll see is that we have articulated with specificity behaviors for each of the indicators, for each of the four categories of lead self, lead others, lead leaders, or lead the organization, for both the campus world and if you are in a support role or working at the district office. And the reason we did that is because we recognize that if you're a leader of leaders, there are common things you have with someone that's at the campus or at the district level, but then there's also differences. For example, at the campus level, if I'm a principal or I'm an assistant principal, I also have the influence of direct supervision over people that I'm actually interacting with on a daily basis. At the district level, in order for you to influence a group of people that you're leading, you don't supervise them at the campus level, so you have to lead by influence. On top of, you're not sitting at a school where you have to lead by influence and by supervision. It's only by influence in some ways. So we had to make sure that as you looked at the documents that you could see how these two things were the same, so that when we were talking about a strategic thinker, there were skill sets on both the campus level and the district level, but that there was a difference that you could tell that it was actually connected to the type of work that you were doing, whether you're at the district level or at the campus level. So this is just another slide that basically articulates those two concepts. And so you'll see there's an indicator with red, with blue, with green, and basically what those represent are specific indicators that fall within each of those three broad categories, which were passion for the work, commitment to personal growth, and dedication to the team. We're in the process of finalizing this, so to give you an update literally from today, we met with the task force today. They saw the draft documents that are fresh off the press that we had fine-tuned from their initial stab at it. And then today they were giving us final comments and feedback around the wording and what things fit and didn't fit. And then we will take those and refine them, and then we will land. So we're pretty much close to the end, which is really, really exciting. It's taken a lot of work to get here. What I'd like to do now is turn some time over to Tracy, and what she's going to do is share with you specifically the details around the Campus Leaders Program. We have been working the District Leaders Program for now, we're getting ready to finish our first year. We'll go one more year, and this upcoming school year we'll be launching the Campus Leaders Program with specific sites, and those principals actually our finalists actually received notice today. So Tracy will be able to share with you the details of that program, and then we'll take questions.
Thank you, Dr. Wirtz, President Reich, members of the board, and Dr. Cavazos. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today about the Campus Leaders Program. Before I delve into this, as a part of the district leadership team, This has been the best professional learning I've had. And I've been in the system in education for over 20 years. And I will just tell you, it's been comprehensive, it's been fulfilling, and it's been critical to the work that we're doing in our district. So I'm really excited about the opportunity to bring in principals and teams. And so I want to just share a little bit more details about the Campus Leadership Program and how it's going to impact our system in a very positive way. So as Dr. Wirtz already referenced, the District Leaders Program we're a part of right now is a steering committee. We had a 2-year commitment, and now we are bringing in our first cohort of 5 that will be a part of the Holdsworth Center. So I'll talk to you about what's a part of the program, the process to get in, and some of the learning that the team will engage in over the course of a couple of years. So 2018-19, we'll bring in our first cohort of the Campus Leaders Program, and then each year afterwards, we'll bring in either 1 or 2 cohorts, and we'll cap that off in 2023. And so the neat part about this is all 5 of the cohorts that'll be part of this program will be able to interact with the other districts who are part of Holdsworth and their teams as well. So great networking opportunities and being able to learn and grow from leaders across the systems in the state. So we will roughly serve about 39 campuses over the course of the 5 years. So that is a pretty significant number of principals and teams who will have an incredible impact on our system overall. This year, we're bringing in 7 campuses, so a total of about 35 participants, including the principals, and those who they select to be part of the team, which I'll talk to you about in just a moment to give you more information about that. And then cohort 2 will bring on 8 campuses every year after that for the additional cohorts. So the Campus Leaders Program is structured around 4 themes, and of course in the center, as Dr. Wirtz referenced, is really about teaching and learning and making sure we're focused on excellence, equity, and outcomes for all students. And so we do that through good people and great culture, which is the foundation of our house. And so the 4 core areas that the program is structured around is personal leadership and making sure it's not only about the principal, but the principal being strategic about selecting an AP, a dean, teachers, some counselors who are instrumental in helping lead that work back on the campus. And Dr. Wirtz referenced part of the excitement about this is that they'll be able to identify a problem of practice they're working around on their team, on their campus, come through Holdsworth Center and really be able to dig into that problem of practice to come up with actual solutions to be able to tackle that a little bit more in a little more sophisticated way. The second part is change leadership. I know as a principal, that's one of the most difficult parts of leading is really being able to exact change while you're getting the support and buy-in from those who you lead. And so through that, we'll get lots of learning around that. The third part is around aligned systems and structures. We're always talking about student achievement being our final outcome. How are our systems and structures in our campuses aligned and designed to really be able to get those outcomes that we seek? And the final structure, the final theme of the structure is around effective teams. We mentioned that the 6 of us on the steering committee, we've worked in a team this entire year, tackling challenges and concerns and celebrating together. And what a great opportunity the campus teams will have to be able to engage in very similar work. So as a part of this 2-year program, of course, I already mentioned they're going to grow their own personal leadership capacity, the capacity of the leaders, the principal, AP or dean, and they're also going to be able to learn from world-class experts. We have been exposed to, as Dr. Wirtz mentioned, some of the best and brightest minds, and not only in education, but in business, really, because a lot of our work is leading in that way. And so they'll be able to grow individually, collectively as a team, and just become much more cohesive. The second is they're going to have time and space to apply their new learning, which is really, really important. Principals are very, very busy. And so if you imagine having a meeting on the campus, you have your team there coming together, you have interruptions and things happening where it kind of takes you away from the work. And they're going to have the space and time to come away from the campus and really be able to delve deeply into that problem of practice, which is really going to be very instrumental and supportive for the principal. And the third, as already mentioned, just really being able to develop strong relationships. I've made great connections and friendships with people from all over the state as a part of the Holdsworth program, and so they will have a similar experience as well. So I'll just share with you some of the application criteria. We wanted to make sure that we had a process that was going to be fair, that would be able to capture lots of principals who are interested, and those who may have a little bit more work to do. They may not be able to apply this first year, but we really wanted people who've completed 1 full year in AISD. You've had a chance to know your school, know the landscape, know kind of your conditions and what you're facing and the work that you'll be able to engage in. The second one, we wanted to make sure all of our campuses that applied, that they've met all the accountability criteria. So if we have a school that's struggling academically and we bring them and engage them in this deep work, it might be taking them away from heavy academic work they need to focus on. And so that was one thing we wanted to make sure. And the third and fourth is really around getting feedback from the employee engagement survey and the parent satisfaction survey. So having campus teams and principals who have led in a positive way and getting good results from parents and from staff members and from staff members as well. So those who met the eligibility, we had a meeting with the principals. We shared all the information about the program, what to expect, and then we started getting applications coming in, which has been very, very exciting to be part of this process. We're actually in the middle of it right now. And so the selection process, we have a selection committee that consists of the steering committees as well as the superintendents, the area superintendents who've helped us determine who are the ones who are going to advance in the process. And so we wanted to make sure we first look at the campus principal, their leadership, their ability, their potential to be able to take this new learning and apply it to their campus and to their work. That was one of the criterion we selected. The second one is looking at the team members. So did the principal strategically choose people for the team who are going to really be those who will be able to move and shake and get things going at their campus? The third one, team cohesiveness. We've gotten pretty close, this steering committee of 6. We spent a lot of time together over the last year, and so that's important to be able to make sure those dynamics are positive. And the last one is really being able to commit to the programming. So as principals are busy, so will you be able to take the time to be able to invest fully in this program as well? So that's the criteria we were looking for in selecting folks for this first cohort. So the application process, it's iterative. It's a couple steps we ask them to go through. The first one is, the first step is they have to complete an online application. And through this online application, we ask them the indicators that Dr. Wirtz mentioned and referenced. We ask them to self-assess. So the principals self-assess. Where do I think I fall in growth mindset? Where do I think I fall in strategic planning and problem solving? So they self-assess and submit their score, and then we ask them to send that assessment, the link, to 5 staff members on their campus. It's anonymous, they don't know who's submitting, and we wanted to see how aligned is the principals thinking about their areas of strength and growth areas and those of the people that they serve. So that was a great indicator for us to delve into the mind of the principal and the team members. We also asked them to submit 6 different essay questions. So it sounds rigorous because it is rigorous for a reason, because of learning is. And so we asked them, what are your 1 and 3 and 5 year goals for your campus? What is a personal and a professional leadership goal that you have, and how will the Holdsworth program be able to help support you in that? How do you strategically use data to make decisions for your campus? And so we use the indicators and scored each of those essay questions to be able to get a clear picture of where they fell in the indicators. And then we wanted to know about the campus team members. So you selected 5 people. Who did you choose? Why did you choose that person? And how will they be able to benefit from this program? And so all of those who were interested in applying for Holdsworth went through that step 1 process. So today, the selection committee, we got together, we spent a few hours together, and we calibrated, made sure we understood the indicators, and we looked at all the applications. So from that, we were able to identify finalists, which I'll talk to you about in just a moment. So the second step is we've heard from the principal, we know who the team members are they've selected. Now we want to hear from the actual team members. So why do you want to be part of this program, and what are your professional goals that you hope will be fulfilled by your participation in this 2-year commitment? And so those who were identified as finalists, their team members will submit this information to us so we can have it to be able to better get to know the team members and their ability to commit to the programming. So our finalists, which will actually be on Monday, we have our finalist interview process. So we actually have 11 finalists who will be coming to on Monday to be a part of our interview process. And for that, we will interview the principal, we'll interview the AP or the dean, whichever one the principal selected. And we have a few questions that we're going to ask around those indicators that we've already addressed with you all and shared with you all. That'll be the first part of the interview, but there's more. So the second part of the interview in the afternoon, we want to get to know the team better. And so what our plan is that we're going to have a problem of practice, a case study that we're going to put right in the middle of the table. We want our team members to really be able to dig into that case study. We want to be able to watch them and their team dynamics to see how do they connect with each other, how do they solve problems together. That'll give us some insight into how they might be able to engage in the Holdsworth work with us as a campus team. And the step 4 is the final selection. That's the exciting part, even more exciting because we're going to have a big celebration for those who get accepted into this program. As you can see, it's been rigorous, but those who make it through, we'll have 7 that will make it through for this first round. We'll celebrate them. And then for those who may not have gotten into cohort 1, because we had a lot of great applicants, all of them were excellent applications, we'll have feedback sessions with them. We'll meet with them one-on-one, talk about some of the indicators and growth areas for them to be able to shore up, to hopefully get them to apply for the second cohort or one of the subsequent ones as well. So this year, our first cohort, we were very proud to have 16 campuses who qualified and who applied for our inaugural cohort. So just about 1 in 5 of our campus principals and teams applied for this first cohort. And we're in the middle of application review. So interviews for finalists are Monday, and we look to notify them that first week of May.
So in conclusion, we have a few steps that we will go through. Once that happens, we will finalize our leadership definition role by role so that there's some specificity within the definition across the system for each person within the system, depending on where their entry point is. And we'll specifically articulate the clear expectations within that definition. As Ms. Brown mentioned, we will launch the definition and the campus leadership program. We're right on the cusp of both of those things. And then finally, our goal is to develop and align systems to help those things be articulated across the district. Even things such as a data system that helps us analyze and figure out where is the potential for talent in the district and how can we grow and develop people. What's our system for coaching people within the district so that there's continuity across schools and in departments, and then finally identify very specifically which areas of professional development are needed in order to build capacity for the leaders that are serving our students. Any questions?
Well, while I'm waiting for trustees, I see one light. I'm sure there will be plenty more. Thank you very much. An incredible, comprehensive process. Great overview, great summary of amazing detail. I can certainly understand why Ms. Smith thinks this is just the most amazing professional development experience. It's the amount of layering in this, such a deep dive, is really quite phenomenal. I'm so proud that you all were selected. Our district was chosen to be part of this process. It is amazing. I have some questions, but I will defer till the end. So with that, Mr. Hogg.
Thank you, Dr. Reich. Dr. Wertz, good job trying to sum up a giant project into a very small presentation. So this is no small undertaking, and we knew when we started applying for this was no small undertaking, and it is the next step in our strategic plan to truly get us to that. I think you guys, some people will always say, oh, too many PhDs working on planning and these type of things. And I said, well, the other option is they don't do anything at all about it. So I really appreciate these kind of structures to help these things. The thing I really like about Holdership, and I commend you guys for focusing, it's about people. We can do all the different things we want with all the technology, buildings. This is about leadership. As we all say, it's about what's the key to education? The first is a highly effective teacher in our classroom. We can talk about pay all we want, but we know the number one reason teachers leave is because of leadership. at a campus, plain and simple. Teachers, when they love their principals, they will go to the hill with them forever, and that is the key to what we're doing. So let me ask, if I looked at this plan, and as I've talked to my colleagues, as I serve on the TASB board, and I talk to my colleagues from Klein and over dinner and things like that, and we talk about this, how would our plan differ if I looked at their plan versus ours?
Well, the process is customized for each school district. So while there are common things that we're looking for or that we're taught to embed in our actual definition, the process that Holdsworth helps us facilitate is completely customized. So our process for landing our definition was very different than any of the other districts that were doing it. For us in Arlington, it was a couple things were really important. One, we wanted to make sure that there was a cross-section across our district that helped inform the design and the wording that was in the definition itself. So if you were to look at our task force membership, you would see leaders in the transportation department, security, you would see people from finance, I mean, all levels of the organization, not just even academic people. And some of the things they helped us do is to make sure, how is this comprehensible to anybody in the system, regardless of who you are? That's one thing. The other thing that was really important for us is that it was very important for us that we grounded it in research. We were not interested in getting in a room and just kind of coming up with our ideas about what leaders look like. We wanted to know that that we were picking behaviors that were connected to outcomes and that they were vetted out, that they were things that existed in frameworks within the business community and in education itself. So I think that if you were to go look at Klein's or even Grand Prairie's definition or however people land, you're going to find that they're customized to, one, the culture that you really want in your system, because ours really, like you mentioned, articulates a specific culture that we're looking for and what we believe actually will resonate with our stakeholders as things that will generate outcomes for kids. And then you'll also notice that there might be qualities or differences in what we put in our definitions based upon what we have, our process that we went through. Like in Arlington, because we used research, we went back to the research that we actually looked at. And we pulled things out because we thought, well, this is a great idea, but then we went in the research, we recognized, oh, this specific indicator, while we think it's great, it does not really support it, it's nowhere. So we would pull it out. So I think those are the differences that you might see. The iterations will look different. The visuals will look a little different. Client has a very specific tagline that's attached to theirs that resonates with their population. But in essence, you might see some of the behaviors that are the same. Like you might see that the way that people categorize them are very similar, like leading yourself or leading others. But the process is really what gets to the difference of the outcome. And I think that if you were to interview the districts across the state, you'd find that our processes were all quite different. And Holdsworth let us do that.
I knew that was the intent of Holdsworth, so that's interesting to see. As I talked about with Klein, we had a little different discussions over it. So, but we both saw
than we did.
We both saw senior staff really moving. So I say that's the thing we notice as trustees. As we start looking at this leadership, when you start identifying and building campus leadership, I know just historically sometimes that means you need to transition some of your leadership. Do we see that as, are we prepared to do that, as we go and make sure people are in the right positions for the right leadership roles?
Well, we are approaching this not from a deficit mindset, but one of growth opportunity.
Right.
So for what we're basically saying is that there is an aspirational nature to our definition, even our cultural tenets. So while we might not all be proficient in all areas right now, we're actually articulating to the system, that's okay, come to us as you are, and then we're going to grow and develop you from that point. So I think that's one of the things that I really valued about our process is we recognized that it was important for us to embed aspirational things in our definition and tenets, because one of our tenets is to get better every day. And unless you're actually setting the bar really high, you're not articulating the very specific destination point you want to strive for. But because the destination point is really high, we also recognize that you're going to have to try to get better every day, which means that you're going to have some areas that you have to grow in. And we are okay with that.
If we can pause for just a moment, Mr. Hogg. Dr. Foss.
So I think, Mr. Hogg, another way to look at that question, because that's an important question, is the intent and the outcome is that there be clarity around our leadership expectation.
Yeah.
And that's the fair way to do it. It's also the best way to do it. When there's clarity, then people understand this is where I can grow, this is where I can develop, this is what I need for the next level of leadership. So I'll give you just a concrete example as we went through all this process. When we ask a principal, is your AP ready to be a principal? It's really an unfair question unless you have a clear set of a definition and attributes that the district has agreed on, that these are the attributes for leadership. And while the principal may say, well, yeah, because that person is in charge when I'm not here, or they handle this really well, those things are really important. But what about on this wide range of attributes that we're looking for in leadership? So calibration and clarity is really important. Then to your question about, well, so how does that work in terms of, well, people who have areas of improvement in these areas? Well, that's the emphasis is on the system to support individuals, but it has to be clear, and that's the concept I think that's similar among all of us, is that clarity is not negotiable. It has to be clear about, here's what we expect in leadership, so that everybody has an understanding, and then we align our professional development and our resources to developing those attributes in leadership across the system. So I think the clarity above all is really important. As rigorous as our interview process is for principal selection and all that, still, it's really important to be clear about what we're looking for in leaders, and then publish it and let people understand, this is, in Arlington, this is what we expect of leaders, and this is how you can grow and develop. So the clarity is important.
And people that want to move into leadership positions want to know what that career path could be and what the expectations are. That's
Absolutely.
what drives people, because people will get frustrated in jobs if they don't have that clear understanding. So let me ask. Dr. Rice, you turn it, someone turned me off. Was that a signal someone just gave me to turn my mic off? Let me ask one last question on this. So Dr. Vasquez, we looked up years ago, we realized we had a leadership shortage of training our own, and that was a huge deficit we faced. And as Dr. Wirtz throws some of these numbers out, I don't think that's I don't think that's going away. Like, how are we growing our own? How are we doing those? And we rolled out Aspiring Leaders Academy, which has had great success. How does that, and if I missed that, Dr. Wirtz, how does that correlate in with the path of those that are going to Inspire Leaders? Because I think we've seen great success of those that have come through Aspiring Leaders. How does that correlate in and line up with everything to Holdsworth? Because the purpose of Holdsworth is to make sure everything aligns and eventually all the way down to every single level of our district. So how does Aspiring Leaders play into that?
So new leaders or emerging leaders.
Emerging leaders, sorry.
Yeah, it is a program that we use and that people apply to get in and then develop their skills to be the leader and to be a principal or an assistant principal. And a lot of what they're learning in that program is aligned to some of our attributes. So we made sure that there's good alignment in that. I think the important thing to note there is that as we become clearer with our leadership definition, then all of those things need to be aligned, including on emerging leaders. And emerging leaders was based on a need, and it was well-funded outside of AISD, which was nice too. But it was based on a need to build a talent pipeline. I think the other thing really important in this whole discussion that we kind of went fast on is all the background system that's being developed to support this. So as an example, once you have clarity about attributes and things like that, is there a self-identifier, a potential identifier that we keep in an electronic system, that a supervisor identifies a future leader and a future leader identifies themselves, and the match between those two? So we can then become a sophisticated kind of system to run analytics to see who is in our talent pipeline, specifically based on the alignment to our leadership definition and attributes. Today, that doesn't exist. So that's Holdsworth is partnering with us as well, and they've picked us out of the group to partner with us to develop that system of talent management, to make it clear. But emerging leaders will continue, new leaders will continue. That alignment is really important, and it already is to a large extent aligned. And it's a good development for staff, and it'll continue up until we start transitioning to our own talent pipeline development.
Right. That's perfect, and I appreciate it. Mr. Kale in HR, I think you could say this, I work with HR leaders every single day. Thank you, Mr. Charles Butts, for providing this to us, because I know lots of my contacts in the HR world pay millions and millions of dollars to try and find talent development programs, because this is the number one thing for not just school districts. And everyone's like, oh, school districts should run like businesses. Well, in this sense, everyone has a talent development problem. It is something everyone tackles. So I think it is right on task with talent development, because that is the key for what we're doing. So I know it's an extra step in staff, and there's always something else you can do. This is a critical step. So I appreciate all of staff and our entire district committee to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hogg. Mr. Chapa.
Thank you, Dr. Reich. I have a couple questions, and I think the first few probably are appropriate for you, and then maybe I'll also move on to the Campus Leaders Program as well. My first question's on slide number, I think, 19. You had talked about looking at different leadership frameworks. Yes. I was just curious, what aspects of the other leadership frameworks that you looked at did you find to be valuable and maybe distinctive that you didn't expect?
I think some of the things we looked at was, one, how clearly they were articulated. For example, the YMCA has a very strong framework. If you were to go into their framework, it articulates it all the way down to not only the specific indicator by where you are in the organization, but then it actually, if you get deeper into it, it even talks about how do you coach towards those things, and they actually articulate questions that you ask. It's really, really detailed. I think the other thing that we noticed that there were some common things between all of them. So some of those things you'll even see embedded in ours. One of the things that was really important is around personal leadership. Most of the frameworks that we examined talk specifically around how do you grow yourself, your own self-awareness, your emotional IQ, what role that plays in the way that you grow and develop other people, which when you think initially, you might not necessarily think, well, if you're looking at a framework from the outside in, you might not necessarily think that as you lead others, the first thing you have to do is start with yourself. And that was a key player in most of the frameworks that we actually looked at. The last thing I would say is they had a way of designing it with such simplicity that it made it easy to understand across the system. And so one of the things we talked about in ours was, it's kind of what Mr. Hogg was saying. We don't want a bunch of jargon in there that you have to have a certain, a degree to understand. That even at, regardless of which level of the organization you work in, you should have an easy access point and make it understandable. So those were some of the big things that we noticed. Many of them are, many of the indicators that you'll find in ours are also around how do you think strategically, how do you make decisions, how do you grow and develop other people, specifically how you use data to drive your decisions, and those were all elements that we saw in some of the other frameworks as well.
Okay. That sometimes, you read about how different education providers do things a bit differently, and KIPP comes up a lot, and I see KIPP on this list here. Do you remember anything specifically about how KIPP approaches their leadership framework that stood out to you?
I don't remember off the top of my head. We dug into those back in October.
Yeah.
I'd have to pull it out. I will tell you that when we designed our framework, and the reason I can't answer it specifically around KIPP is because we looked at, when we read them, we went through all of them, and so now I'm trying for me to pick out specifically which ones are different. I wouldn't be able to tell you off the top of my head, but I will say that when we designed our framework, we leaned into not only the KIPP and EdFuel and even the YMCA, which were really, specifically KIPP and the YMCA, which were these really structured frameworks. But we also went back and looked at the research that was founded at the University of Washington, and what we would find that there were common threads in what research said was actually necessary, and then what you would see over at KIPP and see at YMCA. The elements that were in KIPP and the elements in YMCA and even EdFuel, they weren't really that different. They just approached their work from a different lens, but you found common things among all of them. To pull out the very specific one around KIPP, I'd have to pull the framework.
Okay.
Yeah.
My next couple of questions are on slides 24 and 25, and this is where we're looking at doing, leadership definitions and what the end goal will look like.
Okay.
And wait for them to get up there.
That one?
Yeah, that's a good one. So I saw this and I thought, this looks really familiar to me. Where have I seen something like this before? And I see this in my own job. So in my job as an attorney, I work for a very large law firm that at some level is a very large organization. And so they're trying to define attorney competencies and how we progress and things like that. And so they've come up with things that look very similar to those. And when the new iteration comes out, an email hits my inbox and it's with some fanfare that this is the latest and greatest thing that is imperative for your development as an attorney. And, please read this carefully. And so, the first one that came out and I saw that was great. And I read through it and I was like, oh, okay, this makes a little sense. But each one that comes down since then, it sort of looks the same. And then you get to do the day-to-day of your job. And
Right.
I don't go back and consult that. So if I had to go and peg myself as to, how am I developing as an attorney based on this competency grid that was given to me, I would have no idea where to tell you I am, maybe doing terribly. And so my question is how do we prevent this from
Being that.
which is, this is a great thing on paper, and if I read it, this is a great progression, but it never impacts my day-to-day because I either never come back to it or it's just so airy, high flight that it doesn't really apply to me.
Right. So a couple things. The first one I would say is if that happens, you're right. I think it would be this would be a waste of effort, right? Because this is really about transforming behaviors and helping people learn to grow and develop, and having a fancy document doesn't do any of that. So it really is about the systems that you put behind, and this is really just a tool to support that work. So for example, if I was a person that was in a role that was a leader of leaders, for example, we will eventually get to a place where we articulate what roles land in leaders of leaders. And then when we create the goal setting and the coaching process and the evaluation process, our task will be to make sure that the things that are contained within this document that articulates growth are actually sitting in alignment to those other pieces, so that when I'm a principal and I'm sitting with a teacher and she or he is selecting a goal, that goal is connected to the framework that we've developed and that we're coaching them around that work. And so I think part of it is to make sure that the system actually facilitates it, almost like when you think about the data system that Dr. Cavazos was describing in terms of identifying potential. That system is completely built around this specific framework. So if you create a system that is actually going to call someone out as someone who has potential to be a leader, then when that person self-identifies or a leader identifies a person, that match occurs, it's completely aligned to the framework itself, and it's not just random. It's because they're actually growing and developing in a very specific area. So I think you're right, having a document we actually plan on creating several iterations of the document, not quite what you were describing where they get it in the email, but more in terms of how do you splice and dice it in a way so that I'm a reader, I can see it in any way. But the goal and my belief is that no one's going to grow and develop in the area simply because it's placed in a rubric. It's going to be because the system itself is completely aligned to what's in the rubric. And so when we create PD, it's because we're developing people around very specific components in the actual rubric itself. And so this growth will happen. It's almost like the document is a baseline for which we always can go back to as a system to refer to make sure the systems are actually growing people in those areas, whether it's through coaching, evaluation, or professional learning. It's not going to be the document that actually does it. And we wouldn't have any intention on like sending it to someone and asking them to read it for that purpose. It would really be in the context of designing professional learning and coaching people and growing and developing them and creating data systems and things like that.
We can pause, Dr.
Yeah,
Cavazos.
yeah, and you said it, Stephen, and I would just summarize it by saying alignment. The alignment and it's our responsibility, our task to align our systems, both of selection of leaders, which is really important, and that it's clear and people understand this is what we're looking for, but then support. And when we have performance, growth opportunities and things like that, that it's all aligned back to our framework. It's often what we say about our survey results, for example. It's nice to have survey data, but the most important thing is what you do with it. Mm-hmm. And so same thing with this. It's important to have this, but the most important thing is what we actually do to realize it. And alignment is the easiest way to summarize that. And it's our task to align our resources, our professional development, the experiences the principals and other leaders have. And keep in mind that this leadership framework and the competencies and things like that apply from really level leaders, department chairs, throughout the organization. And so it's a new way to reframe what we expect, but also what we value and how we grow people and develop.
And I would say that to answer an earlier question too, I think that's one of the things that sets Arlington apart from even the other systems is many of the systems are focusing primarily on principal development. And in Arlington, we made a conscious choice, even to the point where we actually altered the words on their framework, that we were growing leaders from teachers all the way to executive leadership, and we weren't going to focus only on the principalship. And to answer your question also, if you kind of look at the framework itself, it's all those systems that sit on top of the leadership definition. Those are the things that actually articulate that definition into action that make those other things possible. The definition itself and paper isn't really going to do anything. It's the design of the data systems, the evaluation process, the way you communicate it, the incentives that you provide people who are exhibiting the behaviors, and you keep wanting to foster and reinforce it. Those are the things that are actually going to take it off the paper and turn it into behaviors.
And I know it's really early on, and this came up a lot during your responses to Mr. Hogg's question and even in Mr. Hogg's question itself, but we've got the pillars here, and it's identify, develop leaders, place leaders, support leaders, and then there's not a further pillar for retain leaders. It's actually on top of the pillars. Have y'all got to the point of talking about what it looks like to retain the individuals who benefit from this type of professional development? Because it sounds like once they get this type of PD, they're going to be an incredible asset to us. And I know when we have leadership candidates brought to the board and we get to look at their resumes, it's very common for somebody to have jumped from district to district and campus to campus,
Right.
Quite frequently. And so what do we do to retain the benefits to the district of them going through this incredible opportunity?
That's a really good question, one we've talked about. I think the way that I would frame a response for you is if you look at the framework, you'll notice the bottom portion are enablers. So those are the things that grow and develop. And then you have the pillars, which are the main points, right? You're going to grow people, you're going to identify them, and then you're going to intentionally place them in a place where they can be successful. But the top part are the outcomes. And the thing that's different about district office from a campus is the campus touches kids and we don't. We don't have access to students the way campuses do. And to what you said earlier, people don't leave their jobs, they leave their bosses. That's typically what happens. And so the idea is that if you really want to retain people, what you have to do is grow and develop people that retain people. As a chief academic officer, for example, a teacher is not going to make a decision to stay or go based upon me, but they will make a decision to go or stay or go based upon their relationship and their growth opportunities that their principal is making available to them. So some of the role around retaining is almost this theory of action that if I grow and develop a leader who can execute these qualities and these behaviors and dispositions and skill sets, it will retain quality staff who are committed to a system because that's the people that work there. It's almost like that kind of mindset. Of course, there are things that HR can do to grow and incentives we can put in the system to grow and develop. This framework is focused really on what are the outcomes of growing those kinds of people, because people will stick with bosses that actually do those things.
Okay. My last set of questions are, I guess, starting on slide 32. So to be eligible to apply, principals campuses must meet the following requirements. And the second one stood out to me a little bit, and I was just curious, how many principals or campuses are eligible, are not eligible to apply for the program because their campus does not meet at least one area under the state accountability standards?
When we looked at these, that's a question we actually asked ourselves because we didn't want to have very many people. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, but I think it was like 8, was it 6? 6? It was a total of 6. There were very few that were that throughout. I will say one of the reasons why we included that is because having been through Holdsworth, which I really agree with Ms. Brown, I've been doing this for many years, and this is by far the most rigorous and best professional learning experience I've ever had. But it is work. You have pre-work that you have to do. You're there for a lot of time. And then you have to come back and apply it, and they have people that are sitting there helping you do it. So we recognize that if you were a school that was struggling with the accountability system, that especially if you were in some kind of turnaround situation, that you would only have so much bandwidth, and we wanted you to be able to make sure that you were being able to not overextend yourself. And so one of the reasons why we placed that on there is to make sure that the schools that were applying, that were going to go through this rigorous learning experience, weren't going to find themselves so stretched thin that student outcomes were suffering while they were trying to build and learn at the same time. What our goal would be is over the course of the next year, those schools, is work with them to help them shore up those areas, and then they would apply for the next round.
Yeah, because my thought was, and it's interesting to hear you say it was 6 to 8 campuses, because my impression was that we would have had more campuses that did not meet that standard, but
It really wasn't that high, actually. Most of our schools met standard in the 4 areas. We have 6, was it? There was like 6 to 8 where you would have like index 1 or maybe an index 3, but it really wasn't that significant. And we specifically looked at that because we didn't want to create a criteria where you're announcing this awesome program and then half the schools can't even apply.
Right.
It really wasn't that many.
okay. My only encouragement on that point would be if it looks like going forward that we have a couple of campuses or principals that it's just they're not quite getting there for whatever reason, but they're still great people who are great leaders that we would want to retain, then if that, I would say if that area needs to be relaxed a bit to make sure that we get some people under the wire to take advantage of the program,
Right.
that we may.
Well, and there's an opportunity to rethink it every year, especially now with the new accountability system. We'll be able to, I think this is our first round. What we'll do next year is we'll consider our process, think about, are there ways to make it better? If we added that in there, what criteria would we actually use and what is the impact? One thing I appreciated about this process is when we initially created these standards, we asked ourselves, okay, so let's filter the world through these. How are we going to land on a group of people that can actually apply? And if so, if we're going to knock very many out, which schools are those, and are those schools possibly in a place where they still need to work on some things before they do this in the first place? And we found that it didn't really do that much. Specifically, like if you look at employee engagement results and parent satisfaction results, most all of our schools are at a 3. So it really took out very few people. I'd say one that we had some people that were really interested in was around the first year in AISD. But one of the key qualities around Holdsworth is you have to have relational capacity with your group because you're building a whole team. And we know that if you're brand new at your school and you're going to move them towards change, you needed time with your people before you could actually initiate the work. And so that's where some of the mindset was around that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd just add an additional question to what Mr. Chapa was just asking. So with this, from the structure, are these criteria things that Holdsworth, you present to Holdsworth, you develop on your own and show them this is what we're working on, and they just kind of observe and then look at other leadership development for you? Or how closely in tune with the actual mechanics of this implementation are they with you?
So when we went to a session, I want to say it was January maybe, they led us through a process where as a team, a steering committee, we sat at a table and we literally started designing what our process would look like. They trained us on communication, they trained us on how to think about this, and then we iterated, and then all the districts did, and we walked the room and we learned from each other's processes and kind of fine-tuned what we would do. And then we came back and we developed it ourselves. And Ms. Brown and Mr. Kale were the primary people responsible for developing this part of the system. They worked in collaboration with the Holdsworth team. So one of the people that we work with, her name is Rachel, and they iterated, and she iterated with Rachel. Then the whole steering committee, we all looked at it. We gave our feedback about the way things we liked and things we thought we needed to improve on, and there was several rounds of that. But Holdsworth did not dictate it at all. We completely identified our process. What we had to do is submit it to them just so they had a sense of what we were doing. And in the same thing, when it comes to even the people we select, we will eventually submit it to Holdsworth. And it's more so that they can vet to make sure we met the criteria, but not because they're directing the process at all. They're really there to help support and make sure there's quality there. What they didn't want is they didn't want districts, because they know the quality of the program in there, and they didn't want districts just picking people. They wanted there to be a process, and they created an expectation around that. But how we designed the process was we had complete autonomy around that.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Mrs. Mays.
Thank you, President Rice. One thing I have to say, the slide that Justin was talking about, when I looked at that slide, the first thing I was trying to do was make it bigger with my fingers because I couldn't see or read it.
I know.
Which made me think about work. I can't see. First of all, I just want to say thank you very much for using this opportunity and realizing what an opportunity this is to get this kind of development. It's like you're going to a high-end steak restaurant and you order a hamburger.
I appreciate the fact that y'all are going and you are taking the best thing that they have to offer off their menu to bring it back to this district and taking your time. So I don't just appreciate that you're going, because that probably kind of came with your job, but what I appreciate is all the meat that you're grabbing to be able to bring back and understand the opportunity that we have for some real growth based on the information you're getting. So thank you for that. One thing I saw in here on slide 6 that really brought my attention was, it says that Holdsworth will not replace the district's role in developing leaders, but it helps build our district's capacity. So you're not just attending and getting a worksheet that says, here's what you do and how you do it, now go back and do it. But it's allowing you an opportunity to learn how can we continue within our district, even when you're not in the program, to continue to build that capacity. I strongly believe that creating a high-performing culture for the district, what actually helps us to support our leaders. And I think that's very important. And one thing that Justin was talking about was to get this off the paper and put it really into practice, I think is when we get to that outcome part. And when people start to see what a difference it is making, when people start to see how they are identifying either themselves or others as leaders and being able to bring that forward, I think that really takes everything off the paper and then gets people to say, wow, AISD is a district whose culture wants to support their leaders. I want to be a part of that. So that does bring me to my first question, which is, I guess I'm just thinking more in the future, and I'm thinking very broad. Okay. But for creating and supporting our leaders, how are we going to take that information and drill it down to not only just in the classroom directly, but for that bus driver that eventually wants to be the transportation director, for that electrician who eventually wants to be the lead technician? How are we going to then take the things that we're learning and spread it throughout our district? Because I think that was a huge intent behind our strategic plan that says we want to make sure that everybody feels like they are a part and they're impacting our student, whether it's directly or indirectly. So how do we drill that down to the other places outside of the classroom where everyone's still having an indirect or direct impact on our students?
Right. So I don't know if you remember in the fall when I gave the first update, I showed you a slide that showed you all the indicators we were learning with Holdsworth in specific locations. We were going to go and watch the best in class happen. And we went to Singapore. And that was an opportunity for us to kind of see how you create a pathway for people. So not only do they completely understand what leadership looks like, but that there's actually an articulated pathway. So wherever your entry point is in an organization, there's a way for you to grow and develop. Well, once a pathway is articulated, then what, like Dr. Cavazos said, then there's clarity around what specific behaviors are actually needed. So when we came back to Arlington in our leadership definition design, one of the things that was really important is that, one, that we designed it with a cross-section of stakeholders sitting in the room. And I can visualize specifically one gentleman who's actually part of the transportation. We had the security manager there, or a leader, but we also had this gentleman from the transportation department. And he was very vocal throughout the entire process, which we very much appreciated, and make sure that whatever we were writing, everyone would understand. And he would bring those examples to the table and say things such as, this is all great and dandy, but if I'm sitting in the transportation department talking to my friends, like, they're not going to understand what this means. Mm-hmm. So it was really helpful to make sure that we would eliminate jargon. And I'll give you one example. So one of the indicators that we had initially in there that everyone talked about was around, and personal leadership was around, emotional intelligence. Mm-hmm. And we recognize that emotional intelligence is jargon. Like, we know what it means, but it's jargon. What it really is talking about is self-awareness and self-management. So we called it self-awareness and self-management. And so what we intend to do then is with our systems then is to align, whether it's your evaluation system, your documents that you use for goal setting, throughout the organization to the leadership definition. So if I'm that gentleman who's leading a group of people in the transportation department and I'm sitting there and I'm responsible for evaluating them, that I will have what I'm working on with them aligned to the definition behaviors. The other thing that's important too is this is really this really fosters the idea of coaching. It's a growth mindset. And it gets back to this idea of it's not a deficit mindset, it's a growth mindset. So one of the other components that we are doing in our system is we are laying the foundation for a system-wide framework for coaching, regardless of where you sit in the organization. And we have two components to it. One is called what we call the science of coaching, and one's the art of coaching. So the art of coaching would be the facilitative questions, the things I ask you to help draw out things out of you to help you solve your problems, and like if you have challenging work, things that you're working through, or tasks, or even behaviors. And then the science of it is the specific methodical process you go through, where you identify what's your goal, what's your current reality, what are your options or opportunities, what will you do, what evidence are you going to use to actually tell you that you got there or didn't get there. What we want to do is train everybody in that process all across the system, so that when we have these tools to help grow people, whether you're sitting in transportation, security, finance, or academic services, you also have a process that you leverage to help make that happen. So it's building the systems that help to articulate it, and one, make sure the documents are comprehensible to all people, and that there is an actual system to then leverage it that we're all used to and can support and develop one another in.
Well, that's very good to hear. On slide 29, awesome to see how it says by the end of the 5 years, we would have resulted in direct service for 39 of our campuses. So we know we've got over 70. So for those additional campuses that may not have had that direct impact, what is our plan then to take those who have participated and get that information to these other campuses and individuals?
That is a very good question that we have not answered. And we've actually posed it to Holdsworth, and we thought about that too. And the best way I can equate to it right now at this point, since we're early on, is the Emerging Leaders Program. So one of the things we thought about the Emerging Leaders Program is, well, this is a really great program to grow and develop principals, but not every principal is going to go through the Emerging Leaders Program. So how do you make it so that you don't create a system where you have two languages happening and some people have a certain skill set and some people that don't? So really what it's about is, what are the actual behaviors that we want to see across a system, and then how do you go to scale? Holdsworth is really about developing and growing people. That's really what it's about. So I think the answer to that question is probably going to lie in the actual work around the leadership definition and the systems we create. Because if you think about it, all that the campuses are going to be learning specifically is how do you develop systems to, one, grow and develop yourself as a leader in alignment to our definition, and two, how do you put systems in place to actually solve problems of practice. Our task will be to, one, make sure that the leadership definition is articulated across the system, and that will happen based on all the things I already said, regardless of whether you go to Holdsworth or not. The other part is as part of the campus leadership program, the area superintendents will have the opportunity to attend all of those sessions side by side with the principals. So what we'll be able to do then is do two things. We'll be able to take the leverage points that we've actually gathered from the district leadership program, have members who sat, like, for example, Ms. Brown, who sat in the district leadership program and who's also sitting in the campus leadership program. And most of those components are very similar. Holdsworth said they were very intentional about that. What they're going to learn with campuses is the same things we learned as a district. The only difference is from the campus lens. And then extract what we believe are the most important components of those things, and then decide how we go to scale with those things in terms of teaching and learning. And the thing that you're describing is an important question to answer, because we're not only discussing the other, however many number of campuses that are not going through Holdsworth, but what do you do when there's attrition that happens?
Right.
When a principal goes through the program, they have this thing going on in their school, and then they leave, and then we have a new principal inside or outside of the system. How do you onboard people with this mindset and this expectation? So what we'll have to do is create a system for that process, to not only get the definition across the system at scale, but also how do you embed the quality components into the system to allow people to leverage them to do their work. Right. I'll give you one concrete example that we've already started.
Okay.
So I don't know if you're familiar with Chip Heath, but he is the author of the book Switch. And they're out of Stanford. They wrote Switch, Made to Stick. They have one about decision-making, a new book around power of moments. And Holdsworth invited Dr. Heath to actually come and train us, and we read the book Switch. One of the things we've already started doing with principals is how do you leverage the Switch framework to facilitate change in your school. And there are very specific components to how you facilitate change. And in the switch framework, there's a whole thing about how do you how do you help people logically figure out how to do it? How do you move them emotionally? And then how do you like mark the path they're supposed to go down? And so we've already started leveraging that process with principals, and even in the design of like the active learning cycle and how we onboard people around that, utilizing the switch framework. And now if you were to go and talk to principals, you would say, well, and you talk to them specifically about what's called the elephant portion of the framework, they would all know what you're talking about. So it's learning how to extract those big drivers that we feel we can go to scale with, and then systematically figuring out how we're going to do it. But we haven't completely answered the question, but it is one that we have to.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. That just reminds me to think of another thing that Justin was talking about is unfortunately, once you put something good into somebody and they leave, it's like your pastor at the church with the associate pastors. Eventually, they might leave and start their own church. And there's nothing we can do about that, and we understand that that's going to happen. But if this process is working, we've had those leaders build other leaders that can then move into their spots. So if this all works, then we see how that might be one way that we can deal with that, because we can't control the other, but we can control how many additional leaders we're building within our own system. Okay, so my last question, and Justin asked this, and you probably answered most of it, but on slide number 32, for our requirements, the last two, the employee engagement result and parent satisfaction results, and I'm glad that you commented that we really don't seem to have a huge problem with that. But when I look at those two, I think that if you were scoring below a 3 in any of those two areas, to me, on the outside, it sounds like that probably is an indication of maybe leadership needs some
Support.
some professional development or support. Right. So that would just make me ask, if you weren't where you were supposed to be in these two spots, do you feel like this is a program where actually that individual could benefit?
So the thing about this program is it's not designed just to benefit the principal.
Right.
You bring a whole team with you. And so if you were a principal, for example, who didn't have the support of your teachers for some reason,
Right.
then we would have to work with you with that first before we would engage with you in the Holdsworth process, because the idea is how do you leverage your entire leadership team to facilitate change at your school. And so what we wanted to make sure was that we were inviting schools who are actually prepared to engage in the work in a meaningful way today. So you were a person who'd been in the system, so you have context. You're a person you're a school that's not really struggling academically to the point where you're not meeting state standards. And then also that you actually have in some ways, the buy-in and the support of your staff and the parents in your community. Ms. Brown indicated that part of our application process for the Campus Leader Program is we gave the survey to 5 other people at the school. Well, the 5 people that we provided them to were not people that were being invited to participate in the principal's team. And that was intentional, because we wanted to know that as the principal, how you perceive yourself, is that how your constituents also perceive you? And if there's not an alignment, that's a conversation that you want to have. You want to think about, well, I think I'm actually doing these things very well, but the other people don't see that. Or if it's the opposite and you're like, no, actually I perceive myself the way my people perceive me, that's a real strength, because then you know where your baseline is and you can build from that point. So we just wanted to make sure that we were not creating a scenario where we're setting the principal up for something that wasn't going to be successful because they didn't have that wraparound of their staff to help them facilitate the change that we knew Holdsworth was going to ask them to do.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, that's it. Thank y'all again.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Mays. Ms. Walton.
Thank you, Dr. Reich. I was most interested in slide number 20, especially the lower right quadrant. Because I believe that this is certainly a formidable issue that leaders must identify and embrace. And that's empowering others, sharing the decision-making, actively building trust and relationships. Good teachers do this. Good leaders should do this also. Right. So I'm optimistic that what we will see from these better leaders is that as we grow these people, they will realize that a punitive system of governing employees where they're writing them up or giving them summative conferences and all of this stuff that's hit in the last 5 or 6 years of our dealings will maybe decrease because it's counterproductive. It doesn't build relationships, and so forth and so on. So when the data is collected, I hope that part of it will be, is there a decrease in this sort of punitive paperwork that's been going on? If you're successful at it, you may put UEA out of business. Seriously. And our people will be much more productive if they're happy and feeling like what they're doing is worthwhile and is valued by the people who are leading them. So I have high hopes for that. And my favorite part is the celebration. I think that's so key. We don't take the time to do it very often. But when these 7 schools are chosen, in the whole process here is built in a celebration. And I think that's just key, that it's a good thing, and we need to celebrate it. And I hope I can be a fly on the wall when that happens, or hear about it anyway. But thank you all very, very much for all of your work on this. And I am certainly encouraged that we're going to have a much kinder, gentler system for our employees when this is all in place. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Walton. Ms. Hudson?
Thank you, President Reich. So the benefit of going last is everyone's already taken all my questions. Some of the same questions that Mr. Chapa had for you were similar ones that I had. I think it's still really early in the process, but questions surrounding how do we retain this talent as we're growing it so that it's not just leaving as quickly as we're developing it, I think is key. And I don't know if you have like a real firm answer to this question right now, but the supporting role I think is really important as well. I have gotten to observe you guys going through this Holdsworth process, and it seems like every time I turn around, y'all are building in more work and just taking on extra in addition to the leadership role that you have in the district. And it's important work, and I'm very grateful that you're willing to take it on. And I think it says a lot that you're leading the way and doing that first, because then you know exactly what's expected. So I guess my question would be, how does that help us support this next generation of leaders that we're about to select as they're going through the process? Do we need to give them additional supports at those campuses, as opposed to just expecting that we've done everything that we can to expect that there's that capacity, but that as they're going through it, that their campus really feels very supported while they're going through that? So yeah, I'll let you address that first.
Yeah, I think the thing about this is that the first thing I would say is the way that we framed this work is that it wasn't additional work. We look at our work with Holdsworth as the core of what we need to do for our day-to-day work anyways, because we recognize that effective leadership actually produces the outcomes for kids that we want. And so when we decided to work with Holdsworth, we asked ourselves that actual question, like, what is it that we're trying to accomplish, and will they accelerate it or not? And if we had come to the conclusion that it was not going to be an accelerant for us, we would not have engaged in it. So one of the things that we have not approached this work, even though designing all of these things has been a lot of time, we all, and I think I can speak, I know I can speak unanimously for our entire group, that we all feel like it was vital work and that it was actually our core work. Like, it wasn't something separate. I suspect that it's the same for principals. So this engagement with Holdsworth will teach them how to do their work more effectively and how to be better leaders. It won't be something that's in addition to them. The neat thing that we have, which I think is unique in the state of Texas, frankly, is that we have a really good structured principal supervisor support office. Like, our Office of School Leadership is unique in the way we go about our work. Our schools are differentiated in terms of the support they receive. We tier them out. They have a menu of services and supports they receive based upon what those needs are. And so wherever the school principal is entering in with their team in terms of learning these skill sets, the area superintendent who coaches them will be right alongside with them, as well as academic services, to help them in the implementation of their work when they identify their problem of practice and try to implement these things. The best way that I can also phrase it too is back to what I was saying earlier, is this is a growth mindset that we're kind of embracing. This is not a deficit model. So the idea is, as you're working and growing, we're here to support and help. And we want to be a think partner with you. We want to provide you with the things that you need. But we do not look at this or even think that the principals will even see this as something separate, because the actual work they do is the work that they will learn about in Holdsworth. I will say one thing that I really appreciate about Holdsworth, and I said at the beginning of the presentation, this hasn't been just kind of going to a training and you come back and you kind of just, read these awesome books and talk to these really great thought leaders around the globe. You're actually talking about the work you're trying to accomplish anyways. They're just helping you think about your work differently. And I will say for myself, just this year alone, I see leadership and I see the potential of impact we can have in education totally different than I even perceived it last summer, because my mind has been opened so much just because of the way that we now see how you can grow and develop talent that the business world has been doing for a long time. It just has not been part of the culture in education. So I think that you're going to find, or if you were to interview principals along the way, that the support that they have, is the structures in Arlington are already there. It's going to be about how do we coach and develop them as they implement these things and give them the space to take the risks and try it. Yeah.
On page 2, we quote some research says supporting leaders, and then it gives some information there. I would find I'm on page 2. I believe it's slide 3. There we go. Yes, thank you. I obviously don't expect you to pull this out of your back pocket, but if we could have access to the research that's being quoted there, specifically the one that says highly effective principals can raise achievement in their schools by as much as 2 to 7 months of learning in a single year.
Sure.
I just think that's really powerful, and I would love to read more in depth about where that came from.
We can get that for you.
Thank you. Let me see if I had anything else. So I just want to make sure that I heard, because what I have written down here is this seems very cerebral, and how does this actually help people relate to each other? But I feel like you probably just addressed that in what you just said, which is the supports are there, and we're not adding work onto that. What we're expecting is that this Holdsworth work will be something that our school leadership can immediately take back and apply and find value in an immediate way.
Right.
Is that what I'm understanding?
Absolutely.
Okay. Then I think you've answered all my questions. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Hudson. So there's, I guess, a couple things that I've been thinking about through the questions and the presentation. To your point of culture eats strategy, where I know that this is all pretty fresh as far as developing what that culture looks like and the tenets. Can you just give us a quick update as far as the implementation of that,
Right.
and how that intersects with this to make sure that that culture doesn't eat this strategy?
Well, the first thing we did is we have not introduced the framework, the definition of leadership definition, to the system at all. The only introduction actually is tonight, really, and also within the task force committee themselves. So members of the task force have seen it and been part of it, and then, of course, the updates we've been providing to you all. And we intentionally talked about which things we talk about when, and we recognized that we decided we just really need to go in the order that we know that the framework sets up. And we started the work around cultural tenets actually before we even engaged with Holdsworth, and we started the design of the culture, right? So this year, what we've done is we have thought about how do we leverage the district leadership, meaning the directors across the system, in our decision making. And so with some routineness, I guess if that's a word, we have met with them, I would say 4 times, so once every quarter. We'll meet with them one more time, once every quarter this year. And we have intentionally introduced and they helped us design the cultural tenets themselves. So at the beginning of the year, they worked on the design with us. They gave us feedback. We asked teachers. We went through across the district around stakeholders to get us feedback around the cultural tenets. Once we landed on the cultural tenets with that group, what we did is we started the process of, well, how do we begin to infuse this in our system? And we took them through a process where they developed action plans for how they're going to begin to communicate these things to their staff and start to develop what those behaviors would look like and how they're going to reinforce them. And so all of the directors and even the area superintendents and myself and Dr. Fest, we were all in that room together. And so what you'll find now is as you go into the system, there has been some intentional rollout across the system around those things. So area superintendents have been introducing them to their principals. Directors across all of the departments in the system have been introducing it to their departments. And then last time we got together, the first thing we did is we had them report out where they were, what are some success stories they've been having, where are their challenges. The last meeting, then we spent some time training with them around the difference between a group and a team. And then next time we come together, we will finalize our year with how do you go about making decision and what kind of decision-making matrices you can leverage as a leader to make effective decisions in connection to the rolling out of the tenets and now our new adoption of the leadership definition. So I would say right now, around cultural tenets, in the infusion of the system, it's in its infancy. Mm-hmm. Right now, it's about putting it out there as much as we can, helping people start talking about it. People are becoming more aware of the graphic and specifically what the things are. And then our goal, the actual actualization of the tenets will become really profound once the leadership definition gets launched because all those behaviors are infused inside it. So it'll be part of your coaching and your development, your evaluation, and your goal setting. So right now, it's more about exposing people to what those things are and what they might mean. And then once the definition gets rolled out, then all the behaviors are they're all linked right in there. Yeah.
That's phenomenal. And it's exciting to me that the underpinning of all this is that it's driving positive student experience and achievement.
Right.
So that's what it's all about.
Right.
That's amazing. So there was some discussion about what this looks like after the 5 years and building the capacity to move this forward. From a budgetary standpoint, is that being worked into this process? Right now, I don't know what the difference or distinction is between the Holdsworth funding and what we're doing internally, but I'm making the assumption, maybe I shouldn't, that this is all part of the Holdsworth process and funding, but maybe it's too early to even begin thinking about it, but we're going to have to be thinking about that budgetarily down the road. What does this look like to continue the employment of this or deployment of this system-wide?
Right. I think the way I would distinguish it for myself is, I'll use the emerging leaders as an example. Emerging leaders functions different because they supplant services, right? You pay an organization to come and help you do something, and you pay for that service and their training, and then you're trying to take those things to scale with other people. The work with Holdsworth is not about that at all, and so the actual tangible costs are going to be more in terms of how we design our systems along the way. But by the time you get to the 5 years, those systems will be in place and we'll be fine-tuning them. There isn't a massive cost just in terms of training people. Those things we will be able to do them internally with our staff because the development will have been there. Right now, a lot of the costs that Holdsworth incurs for this whole program that we benefit from is the staff that they hire to support us, and also in all of our training and travel and things like that. Once we finish our 5 years, we will have developed the capacity to do those things internally, and that need won't necessarily be there, and so that won't be a cost that we will probably anticipate occurring. So I think long term, if I was to say that are there any costs that we'd have to think about, it would be more in terms of actually the pathway along the way as we design systems and think about, for example, the data system that Dr. Cavazos talked about. How do you create a system that actually identifies potential, and what does that look like, and are there costs involved around that? But to do what Holdsworth is doing in terms of training, I don't anticipate that really being a big financial burden. That's something that we will be able to do as part of our daily work.
Yeah. It's fantastic. And another question I have is, Has Holdsworth discussed or thought about, or had we looked at what the, I don't want this to come off as anything negative at all, but what the shelf life is for this as far as the leadership definition, as an example? For the most part, it is something that has been generated by this highly effective team, highly performing team, which is only going to drive the organization further and further. But at some point, people are going to matriculate out of the system. There will be new things coming in and new people coming in to our system. And if we have this included as part of our onboarding process, as an example for our leaders, at some point, there might be some dissension going, it doesn't really make sense to me as far as leadership definition now. Has anybody thought about that? Or
Well, we haven't had that specific discussion, but the way I would approach it is two ways. The first one is if you do it really, really well and it becomes part of a culture, culture gets really, really rooted. And so even when people are being onboarded, they get to a place where basically we only onboard people that fit the definition that we're looking for. And if you keep onboarding people that do that, then it kind of solidifies the culture so that it doesn't really go anywhere, right? So that's one thing. The other thing about it too is I think one of the things that I really love about Arlington ISD and that we adopted even as part of one of our tenets is about getting better every day is there's always an opportunity to reflect. So if you realize along the way that there's something missing, you can always add it. Or if something isn't quite right in the terms of the way that we've aligned it to the systems of professional development, or it doesn't really articulate it well in the evaluation, or this isn't the outcome we're looking for, then we have the opportunity to kind of go back and revise it or think about it. So for me, the leadership definition really isn't about necessarily a shelf life. I think it creates the opportunity to create a culture that really facilitates the way you do business. And we all know, like corporations that have cultures that are pervasive, we could call them out right now because we know what those are, and it's because it's so ingrained that you couldn't even enter that organization if that wasn't your mindset, because when they hire you, that's what they're looking for. Yeah. So I think that's probably how I anticipate the approach being as we move forward.
Sure, sure. Yeah, that makes sense. And it'll probably be just ingrained into a natural sunset process, if you will, of continuous improvement, et cetera. So, yeah, okay. So my final question is actually for Ms. Brown. Okay. She's been very patient there while all of these questions have been asked. Thank you, and thank you for your leadership in rolling this out. So, when the well, before I get there, so with the official announcement of the chosen semifinalists or finalists, I don't know which. Okay. Will that be something, well, I know it will. How will we be notified in that communication loop as well? Because we want to know just as soon as everybody else.
You know now, don't you? We have names. That'll be something we can orchestrate with Dr. Cavazos in terms of letting you know who the finalists are. They all were notified today, and we've been receiving calls and texts and phone calls. They're very excited. Yeah. We're looking forward to seeing them in action on Monday.
That's great. I need to know. Great. So one of the things that has been stated, that there's time carved out for these principals and their teams. What does that look like as far as actual time and time for those, if they are teachers, away from the classroom? And how does that work as far as amount of time and subs and looking at keeping the eye on the ball of our students? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so one of the things that we talked about, had lots of conversation around, is when you pull the principal off the campus or the AP dean or teachers, who's going to be there to support in the absence. And so a conversation that we had that we're solidifying is really having a support team that goes into that campus when the principal, dean, or AP, and then substitutes who will be assigned to that campus during the time they're gone, because we have the dates already for the entire year, so it'll be easy for us to identify that support team to go in. So the campus will still be running, and the kids will still have access to high-quality teaching and leading, and so we suspect it'll be a great way for us also to leverage aspiring leaders in our system to really be able to give them opportunity to serve in those schools while the principal is gone as well. So
yeah, that's excellent. Excellent. I knew you had the answer. I was just curious. Very good. Well, I don't have any other questions. Thank you, both of you, and to Holdsworth for the opportunity for this district to participate. This is, it's just incredible, going from where we were several years ago, and wow, we finally have a strategic plan to this level of articulation and intelligence is phenomenal. So we anticipate great excitement with the announcement of the finalists, and look forward to the next steps. Thank you very, very much. Appreciate all the time.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on. We have open forum for non-agenda items, but we do not have any cards, so we will continue on to the superintendent's report.
No report tonight.
No report. That was easy.
Exactly.
Are there any trustees with reports? Going once, going twice. No trustees with reports. Madam Secretary, do we have any items to consider? Oh,
And I thought this was good.
there we go. Hey, I turned it on. Somebody turned it off. Okay, we got you. Nothing. All right, very good. Well, it is now 9:26 p.m. We are not going into closed session. This meeting's adjourned.